Hello and welcome to the Publicly Challenged Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Oswald, and I hope you join me on my quest for knowledge to become a better public land hunter, angler, and forager. Stick with this and who knows, maybe we will learn something together. All right, real quick before we get started on the show, I'm just going to talk about Treeline Academy. You've heard me say it. I can't even tell you how many times. Mark Livesay is treelineacademy.net. That's treelineacademy.net. Sign up. Use the promo code PC2020. Save yourself $20. Can't say it enough. It's awesome, amazing, most comprehensive e-scouting course out there. Check it out for yourself. Sign up. Use promo code PC2020. And now let's get to the show. All right, so I'm sitting here and I am talking to Brian Barney. So, Brian, I'm going to go ahead and just ask you to introduce yourself, if you would, please.
Yeah, so my name's Brian Barney. So I'm a small business owner in Ennis, Montana. I own a little construction company. And throughout the years, I've kind of established myself in the hunting industry as well. So just through a love for it and a passion for it, I started diving into these backcountry hunts and backpacking, and I just fell in love with it, and then started to travel around to different states and hunt different species, and really fell in love with the bow and arrow and committed myself to that. And through those adventures, I was able to share them through multiple different websites, and actually there wasn't websites when I started. When I started, you had to send them off to magazines and get published in magazines. So that's really where I got my start. And throughout the years, yeah, a few internet articles, but I just kept after it and built it brick by brick. And it was something that I loved. So I started out writing, and I wrote for finally found a home at Eastman's Hunting Journals, like after I had written and sent away all these articles and been published in these places, but the right fit was Eastman's Hunting Journals. And so started writing exclusively, excuse me, I got to get my mouth to work here, but I started writing for them. And yeah, they asked me, I said, I'd like to write pro staff articles. And he sent me, he said, well, send me some ideas and I'll see if I can get you an okay for them. And I think I sent him 30 ideas the next day. Like I just, all that hunting stuff and that thinking, like theorizing and trying to get better at it. Like, man, I just fell in love with it. So started to do that, and then got opportunities in filming, and then started this podcast, Eastman's Elevated, like 5 years ago. And yeah, it's just been a great journey. I'm just I'm living my best life for sure.
Yeah, I definitely say so. It's pretty cool. So where did you grow up then? Did you grow up in Montana, or did you grow up somewhere on the West Coast or something?
Yeah, so good guess. I did grow up on the West Coast. So I grew up in Olympia, Washington, which is the Pacific Northwest. And so I grew up with a lot of hunting in my family. My dad just absolutely loved it, and Grandpa loved it. We'd have a cabin we'd go to, but the opportunities in Washington, they were limiting. Just the time you could hunt, and seasons, and lower game populations. And to tell you the truth, like we just beat brush. Like we got after it and hiked a lot of miles and hunted really hard, and I learned some great lessons. But it wasn't until I moved out west and moved to Montana. So I actually moved east, but I think of it as like Western hunting for mule deer and elk and bear. And there was just so much opportunity that I just immersed myself in like every facet of it. Horn hunting, would teach me where the bulls would be in winter range, and where they migrate back in the spring is where they migrate out in the fall, and try and figure out where they bed and where they feed and find these shed horns, and so that was another season. And then spring bear, and I never really fell in love with spring bear until I tried to do it with a bow and arrow, and then I fell in love with it. And there's no bait in Montana. It's all spot and stock, but their numbers are condensed in the spring. But it was like dangerous game, it's like the blue collar's dangerous game. And that's what I'm into, is like I'm just a carpenter and I can't pay big money for these hunts. So like I put in my own time, I put in research, and whether that's looking at maps or in person, scouting it during season, during shed season. So I just put in this time to learn these hunts and these places, and really I've been able to travel all throughout the West and just do the coolest hunts, like high country adventures, adventures for elk, just peak rut. Been up to Alaska hunting caribou and moose up there. New Zealand hunting tar on their public lands, which is just crazy. Hawaii, like I've just I built this life surrounded around my love for bow hunting, and that's kind of my vehicle to travel the world and to experience things. And it's just taught me so many lessons about the more you put into something, the more you get out of it. And really the harder you work at something, the tougher these hunts are. Like the more they mean to you in the end, the more you crave them when you get home. So that's really been the journey. Grew up Pacific Northwest, moved to Montana when I was 20, and really have been traveling around everywhere they'll let me with a bow for since I was 25.
That's pretty awesome. I've kind of come to the same conclusion. It's like the more time I have with my bow in my hand hunting, the less I lean towards picking up a rifle or a shotgun. Like here in Illinois, it's pretty much shotgun only for big game. But it's just one of those things that even this year I had 2 tags that were shotgun tags, and I only went out one day. I didn't have it in me. I was already bucked out, and I was like, man, I'd rather have my bow in my hand. So I see how that happens, and I can't really even explain it. It's just it becomes like a second nature to where you almost want that. It becomes like an extension. It's pretty it's neat. It's neat to experience that. And now really, I don't even gravitate towards the shotgun tag. I don't even know if I'll get one next year.
Yeah, it is magical, the flight of the arrow. Like I love hunting, and all hunting is fun, whether that's rifle or shotgun. Like it's all action. But yeah, eventually it seems like my skills had progressed to a point where, and at least out west, the hunt ends at 200 yards with the rifle, and it's just beginning with the bow. And I fell in love with like trying to get close to him, and then just how intense the experience was. And so while I gained a lot of experience with rifles and had a lot of fun and learned a lot, and my family with rifles, my daughters and my dad, and they love it. But for me, it seemed like I fell in love with that challenge in bow hunting, and then I wanted to get really good at it. And to get really good at it was to do it all the time. And so I just gained more experience through always carrying that bow, and always. It's like the more difficult path, but when you put so much work into it and practice with so many arrows and get so good at it, and then love that intense encounter, like I just couldn't see myself doing it any other way, so that's me too, man. I fell in love with the bow, and I'm still like, my love just grows for it every season. I like it more and more, and there's just no limit to how much you can learn and how good you can get at it. It's just like the harder that you work, the luckier I seem to get, which is really cool.
I think I've actually heard you say something like that before, where it's your output equals how. Is there something that you've said like that? I'm pretty sure it's your output equals something your return, or something like that. That kind of stuck with me as far as a Brian Barney quote.
Oh man, yeah, I can't remember exactly, but I'd probably screw it up if I did remember it. I'm always screwing up quotes. That's like that's key. I get the same inspiration and motivation from quotes, and I love what they tell me, and then I try to recite them, and I just butcher them. It's hilarious.
But yeah,
but it really is like it's not always even Steven, and there is luck involved, and there is good fortune. But yeah, I mean, it's just been the harder I work, the bigger return I see on my investment. The harder I work at bow hunting at every facet, the better shot I am, the better shape I am, the more map research, the more scouting, the more days hunting, the more I put into it, the more I seem to achieve. And, I'm able to, I'm really at my happiest, like in the mountains and enduring tough storms or tough hunting, or I love being out there and doing it,
Yeah. So, I mean, you're a pretty high energy guy. Are you the kind that would ever sit in a tree stand and hunt whitetails?
Yeah, yeah. I have. That's just the most effective way to do it is to ambush them and hunting those small tracts of land. Like, you don't want to scare them off there, let them know your presence. So yeah, like it's definitely the approach or the smarter approach. So yeah, I've been out to Ohio and I sat all day sits for. It was at least a week. It seemed like three. They're long days, man. It's tough. It's more of a chess match with those whitetails, and it's still like it's a mental grind, like to make those all day sits. And then I've never been so dang cold as sitting still in a tree stand. Like even out west when it's below zero, I get to move. And like at first I just didn't wear enough clothes because I was used to layering for out west hunting. So I definitely had a learning curve. But yeah, man, I mean the most effective way to hunt, like I will do that. And I tend to steer away from like those and blind hunts and do more of the spot and stalk because I love it so much. But that doesn't mean that I won't do it. Like when in Rome, have to do what the Romans do. Like I don't try to reinvent the wheel.
Right. Yeah, that's for sure. I take a week every year and I hunt whitetails. I call it my rutcation. And those all day sits, I just started doing them like within the last year or two. And they are tough. I have a hard time. I have to find little things, and the best advice I got from people was, well, they make cell phones now. Just don't make it a crutch to where you're sitting there and on your phone and miss all the deer. But it's like I'll give myself 15 minutes of scrolling my Instagram feed or something, and then I'll take a break from that, get myself something to drink, something to warm me up. And then it's just little micro breaks in between that are really what carry me through. Did you find anything like that, or what was your tips?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, same. I wasn't on my phone much. I was trying to just take it all in and trying to experience. But I'm sure I got on my phone. But yeah, you're right. You do break it up in smaller time periods where it's like I'd have a thermos of coffee, and every time I could pour a hot cup of coffee and like pass that 10, 15 minutes, it was like just making it in between windows and tough to stay present. And man, I am impressed at those whitetails, like how good they live in small terrain. And what I mean by that is like they can live in the back of a farmer's field and get to be 5 years old, and they get really good at living in that small space undetected. And
Yeah.
so yeah, like it's a mental grind to sit in those stands. And then it isn't easy on those whitetails. They're so switched on. They're a switched on species, and they've learned to look up. But they're like any animal. They catch movement really well, and that includes movement out of a tree stand. Like you're not invisible up there. Like any movement, they can detect you. And then of if like getting into range is one thing, but those bucks, especially when they're rutting, they never stop moving out there, and they're constantly moving through shooting windows, and you're trying to get a shot. So it's really tough, and I really respect good whitetail hunters. Those mature animals, like they're wily.
Yeah, for sure. So I was looking and I happened to see a while ago, and I was looking through your Instagram feed again, and you set a personal record for yourself this year, didn't you? As far as a bull elk.
Yeah, yeah, I had a great season. Like, man, I a bunch of time with family and friends, and then able to just send it on some big adventures. And so yeah, elk hunting the seasons started off. Had a couple of elk tags, and filled one tag on a great bull, just these giant fronts, like 20-inch fronts, so much mass, and just a real heavy bull. It went like 48 wide or 50 wide. And a great dark horn bull, and I killed him with my buddies and in the mountains, and like gosh, two different backpack trips, like 6 days of grinding, something like that. So it was just awesome. I killed that bull and came back and got a little break, and had my home state left, and a couple Hawaii buddies that drew it this year, and so they were over with me, and so then we headed out there for another elk hunt. And yeah, I was trying this year. Like, he checked a lot of my spots that are usually pretty good, and just wasn't bumping into the elk. Because elk are nomadic and they really move through country, and they can be hit or miss, or all or none. You're either in them or you're not, you know. And when you're in them, it's the most exciting rut craze frenzy, that you can imagine with a bow in your hands. But when you're not in them, you're just traveling a lot of country. And I was averaging 13 to 15 miles a day just trying to find elk, and just wasn't picking them out. And so, I had to change my strategy, and so go to some spots that I've never hunted before, but I've e-scouted and I've really wanted to get into. And so it gave me a good opportunity to get into a couple of those, and struck out in a couple. And then, once you know it, like, worked down on this deal and found this bull. And like, the crazy thing about experience is, like, it just teaches us. And through experience and through all these years of Western game hunting, like, I've got pretty good at seizing opportunities, or knowing when to go all in and when to move in and when to hold back. So I found this bull, and I found all the cows. I saw them before they saw me, down in a little gut or a depression, like a drainage that went down. And then the bull walked up, and he was just this great big wide bull, and he just had it all: great fronts, thirds, force, tails, like, just has it all. Super wide, tall, just, great one.
So,
So he had two. Go ahead.
oh, I was just, you go ahead and you finish what you're saying. I'm sorry.
Oh, so it was him, and then he had two satellite bulls. And yeah, that night I sat above him, and I tried a couple different approaches to try to drop in on him and see if I couldn't get within bow range of his cows, and kind of try to make something happen with a good wind. And I just wasn't able to. And then, right at last light, the thermal started dropping, and I tried to go all the way around him, around the drainage over there. And as I was going around that drainage, there was a satellite bull down there, and so a third one. And so, there was no way to get in. And so I just backed out, and had a long hike back that night. Got back in the middle of the night, met up with the guys, and said, "Yeah, I got a good bull. I'm gonna go in on him in the morning." And then cruised in the morning and was able to find him. Kind of waited to make a play, and waited for him. They started going up to their bed, and then I was just trying to coyote and stay with the herd. Like, I hadn't seen my opportunity to go try to get in. It was just two satellite bulls and a bunch of cows, and then that great big bull. And finally I saw it, went around a hip, and able to capitalize and see my all-in moment and go for it, come over the top, and he's just tailing a cow and stops there broadside, gives me the shot I've always dreamed of. So yeah, my biggest bull to date. Like, I put a great arrow in him, and those bulls are so big and so tough. Like, he had so much pride, he didn't want to die in sight. I gave him a perfect arrow, bleeding really good, but he made it over the ridge. And so I gave him some time, and then climbed the ridge behind him so I could kind of glass down where he went. And he was dead. He just he died as soon as he made it over the ridge. But yeah, my absolute best bull to date, that I've been hunting 20 years for. He killed a lot of great bulls, but this one is definitely the best. He's just got it all. It's super cool, man.
That's so awesome. It's really cool. So, as like a beginner like myself, I know you do a lot of actual glassing and spotting and then stalking on them. I mean, would I be better off to go and try and do more calling and bring in a bull, or should I still try and, depending on the terrain, I guess it would matter, but try and spot them up and then go in on them?
Man, you answered your own question. Like, it depends on the cover and where you're hunting them at. Definitely more open terrain is more conducive to stalking. But man, I've just committed to stalking elk, and so that's the game I play. And I like to stalk them in their feeding features. And so, it seems like everywhere I go, no matter, like, some stuff's just too thick, as you can't ever glass it or get a peek at it. But for the most part, like, I'm able to spot and stalk them everywhere I go, and that's in the mountains, that's in the breaks. It's I just look for them in feeding features. Elk don't get enough feed in the timber. They have to come out into openings, and that includes, like, thick cover of the Pacific Northwest. They got to come out in clear cuts and alder slides and thickets where you can see them. They have to feed out there. They're 4 to 700 pound animal, 800 pound animal. And so, like, I really use my glass and in feeding features, and I use a combination of vantage points, but really I like dive into country and make good hikes up ridge lines and things. And I like a master vantage point, but for elk, I just really like traversing through country and just glassing every little available opening. And I like getting in there early and listening for bugles. And even though I'm not calling at them, like I still get to hear the rut and bulls still bugle. And when I find a bull, he's not on edge. He's not on pins and needles, and I'm able to stalk in. So it's a tough decision and a tough call because it takes years to hone either one of those. And I definitely know calling, like you definitely call in more satellite bulls, but the action can be crazy with calls nowadays too. But man, I mean, I sure like the spot and stock game, and I think like when you commit to it and then you perfect those techniques, I think you kill consistent bulls year after year. So I really like doing it that way. That's at least my preferred method. But more than one way to skin a cat, and a lot of people kill elk by calling them in too.
So one of the things that you hear is people tend, especially on public ground, to call too much or to condition the animals. What's kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, less is more with elk. Like I started off calling and called in a lot of bulls for myself and family and friends and things of that nature. So definitely less is more. And it's more about the location of the call and the setup you're making than it is the calls you're making, and really reading the reaction of the bulls and trying to respond to that. But yeah, a lot of times these bulls are bugling back and they're really gathering up their cows and moving away. So I think it's about reading the scenario and reading the bulls like language back and forth, and then really plotting it out where you're going to call from. And we used to do really good with cow calls, and I know some of my buddies still do good with cow calls. So I think it's just reading the reaction of the elk, trying to make good setups. I would always call elk in when I get to where they want to go. So if they're heading to bedding timber, if I can be in that bedding timber, like, man, he'll come check me out. Or even in his travel route or where he's headed, or if I call from a saddle and he's headed towards there, it seems like they just come in on a string. And so I would do more of that than I would like chasing and calling at him. But there's some other techniques too, like raking trees works really good. Like that'll get their attention and bring them in without even making a call. Sometimes it's the subtle noises, rolling rocks and kicking dirt, so it sounds like help scraping trees. And then also like when they're calling, like if it's a two-person setup, like it doesn't hurt, like if you're going to call at some elk and try to figure out where their escape route is, and have one guy head for their escape route and one guy start calling and trying to hunt them, and then when they try to escape the drainage, you got your buddy up in that saddle where they're going to leave the drainage, and he might get a chance too. So elk's just all about thinking outside the box, but I would say it's like reading the engagement level of the elk that you're calling at, for sure, and less is more.
For sure. What's crazy is you just mentioned the escape routes. And I just had a guy I was talking to, and he actually told me, and this was for whitetails. He's like, if you're using public land and all these guys think that they know where these big bucks are bedded and they're going to get right up on them, find those escape routes, set up on them. And if you've got to sit all day, eventually somebody's going to push one, and one of those big bucks is going to get up and go out of those escape routes, and you're going to have success. And I was like, wow. It was like a light bulb. I never thought of doing something like that. Normally it's, try and pursue them where they are, not where they're going to escape to or something like that. But that's solid advice. I mean, I don't know why. I just never thought of it.
Yeah, it's definitely outside the box thinking, for like escape routes on those or mule deer, and it works in pressured areas. And a lot of times hunting areas, you just figure out how animals move through country and where they escape to and from. And we have a mule deer saddle too that's miles back, and these deer always escape this basin out this saddle. And so that's how we'll play that game, whether it's me stalking them or a buddy stalking them, and the other guy will go to that saddle. And I mean, I wish I could tell you that we killed a deer off that saddle, but we've been dang close. I think there's been a couple in range and some swirling winds, and who knows, maybe even a missed shot or something. But yeah, I mean, that escape route, or just like theorizing and thinking outside the box. Like our biggest asset as humans is to be able to outthink our quarry, and that doesn't always mean like stalking it where that elk's feeding. It's like really picking your time to go in, like seeing where he beds, where he feeds, seeing like an opening, trying to get those consistent wins. It's like same as it is whitetails. It's like this total chess match, and once you locate a bull, you got 100 decisions to make, and if you get them all right, like, you may arrow that bull. But if you make one wrong along the way, pressure him the wrong way, get the wind wrong, make an approach where the winds are swirling, like, there's 100 different chances to make the right or wrong decision, and it comes down to instincts and experience. But I mean, that's the game I love to play. And when I'm immersed in that, like trying to kill a mature bull that I really want to get an arrow in, like, it's so fun to just try to theorize and think and come up with how I'm going to kill this elk. And really, like, I kind of like to dog them and spend time with them. The element of surprise is so key. And so with the element of surprise being so key, I never want to call at them, because they just, like, once you call at them, they're on edge. They just know, something's going. And sometimes you can slip in and you're part of the herd and you're part of the whole deal and it all works out. But like this year, I mean, I went into this location and I was in the mountains and I had hiked in and I glassed over, and man, I glassed this good, like, 6-point bull. I think it was a 6x7 or something. And he's got some cows. And so I start working that way. And as I keep glassing, there's just elk all over. It's just a little super party in there, and there's, gosh, I think they see like 2 or 3 good 6-point shooter bulls, and so I start working down this ridge, and I kind of spotted them early afternoon. So I got a ton of time. And as I get over there and I'm just getting close and starting to close in from down the canyon, there's 2 guys that are on them before I'm on them. And it's public land, but these guys' tactic is to go up and call at them. But I'm on the opposing hillside. Now I'm stuck. I don't have a move to make. I definitely don't want to screw up their hunt. My only deal is to back out of there. I got to go find different elk. But I'm here now. Let's see what happens here. And I can watch him go up in the timber and start calling, and I can watch all these elk go on edge. And I watched him chase all of those elk out of there, and they had a decent win. They were just up there calling at them, and these elk had just played this game before, and they were all out of there. So 120 head he chased out of there, 3 shooter bulls, a bunch of other raghorns. And so all of a sudden, like, those guys are game over, but I'm in the game. They headed up the drainage, like, across from me, away from these guys, and they start covering miles. And so I just used my fitness, and I was able to get behind the ridge, and man, I was just able to jog and coyote that herd and stay up with them, and I could stay up with them 2, 3, 4 miles until they just went back to being elk. And now they're wallering down in the bottom, and now they're moving up to this big flat. And man, oh man, there was a really nice, like, 320, 330, 6-point, beautiful ivory tips, and he was all mudded up from down in that bottom. And I was able to cut those elk off at last light, and that bull came by me, and I had all the cows in bow range, and I had that bull, and I drew on him once, and he gave me like the little quartering toward shot, and I just don't like it with elk. It's like got to be perfect. Even though elk are big, got to put a perfect shot. And so I passed on the shot. They walked up, and then they met up with another huge herd, and it was this super party of bugles. Like, I don't know, must have heard 1,000 bugles that night, just all up there doing it. But my point is that elk know those sounds, and they know when it's not natural, and they get out of there. And those bulls were up there bugling and glunking, and I got stuck at 200 yards up on the big top up there, and couldn't get any closer. And then so I just bailed off the ledge, and then I slept there that night, and all I could hear was just bugles. And I mean, watching them at last light, they were posturing towards each other. Couple different shooter bulls that I'd kill from this group, and then a couple from the other group, and it was just crazy rut action. But it, like, that element of surprise is just so important with those elk. And so that's how I keep that, is by being quiet, and then kind of adapting to the situation. I go get into elk, but just never bust them, just never let them know I'm there, just never stalk to failure, never go across that opening, just always try to catch them first. And it seems like the longer I play the game, eventually I get a shot, and we followed that group all the way around the mountain for the next couple days, and found other elk, and then had to go out and resupply, out of food, out of water, came back in, and then ended up arrowing that good bull on that backside over there, quite a few miles in. But man, yeah, it was awesome. I love hunting elk.
That's awesome. So for those listeners that don't know Brian Barney that well, he's like a mountain goat. So when he says he actually chased down those coyoted those elk and stuck with them, he probably actually kept up pace with them, which unless you're a superhuman, you're probably not going to do. But also, with that being said, it sounds like, I mean, that because that's one of my biggest fears, Brian, is like as a beginner, first off, you're just kind of you're wanting that encounter, right? That interaction, and then once you have that, of course, it would progress and it would be closing the deal. But I think one of my biggest fears is getting on them and then somehow blowing them out of the valley and having to start all over again.
Man, that's all our fear. It is like, man, I mean, they're so tough to find. And then, yeah, you don't want to blow them out of there. You want to play it right. But, there is being too passive too. And to kill an elk, you just got to go get into them. And you got to go get into them and then let your instincts take over, and also, I mean, there is a time to hold back as well and watch them and wait. But for elk, gosh, I mean, for me, I just got to go get into them. I got to play the wind right. I got to rely upon my instincts. And, and I fail a lot and spook a lot of elk over the years, but eventually you get pretty good at it, and then you're able to make good on these encounters. And the bull I killed, I actually spooked him. So I was up on we climbed the top of this mountain that was I don't know, maybe 11,000 foot. It was way too high for elk up there, but they had rounded the hill, and so we actually thought we were going to get on some elk, and then I think they made it all the way up the drainage. So anyways, we end up on this vantage point at night and spot some elk. And so my buddy Robin's interested in this bull over on these elk, and there's a play on them. And so he goes for those. I stay on the vantage point, and as I start glassing around, I pick out this bull down below me. And God, he's like lopsided. And he doesn't look very big on his tops, but then I see him like give me a width shot, and I can see his fronts, and they're gigantic, and watch him stand up, and I'm like, man, that is an old bull, and he's big. The bull ended up scoring like 330, 329, I think is what he went. But he stood up, and it was like, man, that's a bull I want to kill. And I ended up dropping down a chute that night, and he had some cows and working into him in the timber and just playing it right, like I'm telling you, like moving really slow. Like elk, it's all about speed, and there's a time to run, like when I was keeping up with those elk, and then when you get in close, you just moving like super slow, watching your footfalls, just creeping in, trying to catch them first. And I caught that bull, and he was working down through this deal. And man, I was trying to get a range through him through these trees, and then same thing. That bull steps out, and he's right in my range. I've got a good range on him, and he's quartering towards me. And he sits like quartering towards me, which is just the worst angle for elk. Gosh, we had to stare down for 10 minutes. I mean, the encounter lasted down there 25 minutes. He didn't know I was there, knew something was a little fishy, and then he kept walked through my shooting lane, and then got over and got into my bad wind. It blew up. I blew him up, blew the cows up. They all spooked. So that was my hunt. I ended up sleeping right there that night, sending Rob a message and said, hey, I went down for this bull. I'm down in the bottom, and he's over the other side over a drainage. He chased those elk, never got a chance at him, got pretty close. And so, I had to sleep there that night. And so the next day, I just start rolling country. And elk have a flow through country. They're nomadic, and they keep moving. And they'll go for a while, and then they'll go back to being elk. And so, I really wasn't planning on finding that bull again, but it just happened to be that that's how it happened. We kept rolling out, ended up hunting elk that night. We got into some different ones. We dropped down with Rob on some elk, and we got close to this 6-point. 6-point was like 90 yards. We had cows closer than that, just in them. Snuck out of there that night, and we're back in this super party, a couple drainages over from where we were, and then we hunted that morning, and I think that's when we had to go out for supplies. But we hunted the morning, went out just a ton of miles, made it to the truck, refilled all our water, all our food, and it was just like, man, it's 4th and goal. We're just in elk. We just got to get back in there. And then we crushed it and made it back in there. And when was it? Oh, it was that night I saw that lopsided bull. And then the next morning, saw some elk behind camp, and so sent Rob for those. There's a nice 6-point in there, and I was really after that lopsided bull, but I'd seen him. This is the 3rd day I had hunted this bull or seen him or tried to get close. And that was the day I was able to work into his cows, backed out at one point, and then saw a cow kind of cross down below me. And then all of a sudden I see that bull, and he's below me and by himself. And man, I've kept my wind right all day, able to creep right down into range and kind of use the topography of the hill to kind of come up. And he was looking over his cows, had no idea I was there, and put a perfect arrow in him. So Yeah, man. I mean, you end up failing a lot, and it sucks. You don't want to spook them, but eventually you just got to go all in. It's like I hunt elk aggressively. I don't hunt them passively. And when you bust them, it sucks. You got to go find more, but it's just the game.
I think you've actually mentioned that to me or told me is you got to be aggressive until it's time to actually be patient, something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And like when I'm going on a stalk, it's adapting to the conditions. And so I'm on a stalk. Sometimes the wind will change, and now I've got to back totally out there and try to circle around these elk a different way. Or a lot of times I'm working in, and then there's a satellite bull or a cow standing there, and they might catch a little movement and stare in my direction, and then I'm stuck frozen. And man, I've been stuck frozen for 45 minutes where the herd's in a perfect position. I could kill him, but I've got this one elk that's looking at me that's going to give the whole thing away, and just waiting for him to roll to a different position. And so that's what I mean, like coyote in the herd is just staying with them, trying to keep that element of surprise. And then when you see an all-in moment, when you know you can kill that elk, like your whole mind and your body will just be screaming at you, go kill that bull now. It's like, at least for me over the years, like I just, it's like, I'll coyote them, stay with them. I'm keeping tabs on the wind. How can I get close? Can I do this? Can I do that? And then they roll over a rise, and I'm like, oh, now I can't see, now's my time. And I go for it, and those are those all-in moments, and they don't always work out, man. I spook them too. But my goal is to never spook an elk, and my goal is to slip in there and then get in close to the herd and let something happen. And a lot of times that bull will push around those cows, or like I say, thinking outside the box too, like trying to get in front of elk, like trying to see where they're going to move and get to where they're going to go. Like I told you on that 320 ivory tipped bull, like those elk, I was able to run around that ridge and then able to see where they were going to come up and get in front of them, and then have them pass right by me. Like I never had to sneak up on them. They just walked right in front of me, so there's some of that happens too. It just getting in close, keeping the element of surprise, and then elk just walk around and move around, and so then sometimes you get lucky.
So do you ever use like a decoy or anything like that? Do you ever play that game or no?
No, I haven't. No. I think they work good in the right scenario when you're calling to give an elk behind you, something like that. I think they'd work pretty good. But now I've just fallen in love with like the getting close game. Like I committed to it a long time ago. It was like I can hunt any animal during any season across the world if I learn how to spot and stalk effectively. And so like I've really committed myself to learning that and getting better at it and getting better at my craft. And I still fail, but I've got a lot of confidence in my skills, and like I know it. I know it'll work out, and I know I can make it happen. And I kind of know the rules now. It's not such a gray area. I know black and white how much noise I can make, how much movement I can, how much cover I need. Like I've made all these mistakes, and so I've got this like whole catalog of information of right and wrongs that I don't consciously always think about, but it's in my subconscious decision making and in those hunting instincts. And so man, I just rely heavy on those. And like I say, I still make mistakes, but eventually I end up getting it right. So man, I just love it.
So can we talk about that then? Like as far as making noise and when's the appropriate time to, make the noise and how much noise versus, obviously if you're trying to stalk in or something, but I guess maybe in some circumstances you might want to make noise while stalking in if it's in the timber or something like that, right? Where that bull might actually get up and pique his curiosity. Would that be like the right scenario or how would that go?
Yeah, I think making noise when you're doing calling setups, when you're really trying to sound like elk. And I know walking through the timber, sometimes like an elk herd can be moving through the timber and they just think you're elk. But I don't think you purposely want to make that noise as you're moving in, as it draws their attention towards you, and they can blow up. And I don't really chase them into their bedding zone. Like if I can follow them in there and I can see them, I'll still make a play. But a lot of times, like I want to hit them in transition, or I want to hit them in their feeding feature because they're out in the meadows and I can kind of keep tabs on all their heads. When they get in that timber in a herd dynamic, they bed down, but you've got these 20 different heads of elk looking in every different direction. And unless I know exactly where they are and where my approach is, I tend to like wait. So if they put away in thick timber and they're not rutting like crazy in there, like I'll just sit on that timber and wait for them to come out in the evening. Yeah, and as far as noise, like man, it's like the more wind noise there is, the more noise you can get away with. The farther you are away from elk, the more you can get away with. If you're using topography and you're a drainage over and there's a ridge in between you and elk, you can get away with quite a bit of noise. Now, when you're above them and in earshot and you're within 100 yards, if you snap a stick or roll a rock, you're gonna get their attention and they're gonna look up and at you. And so, like, what I mean by that is like just knowing what that right speed is on elk. And sometimes like you're jogging to try to keep up with them when you're on the backside of a ridge, they can't see you, they're on the move, you're trying to move with them and see where they're going to bed, or you're trying to maybe cut them off, and so there's a time to run. And then like when you're in close or when you're slipping down on them in the open and they're feeding around, then it's the time to be on your butt and like be scooting down the hill with your bow on your lap and keeping your eyes on all those elk and making sure none of those heads are looking in your direction. And then you slip down another yard and then you look at their heads. And if anything turns in your direction, just stay frozen. Animals, they don't pick up. Like sometimes they can pick up your silhouette, but they see movement over anything else. And so a lot of times if you just hold still, that elk will forget about you, go back to feeding, or she never saw anything in the first place. Like they're ungulates, and so they're constantly putting up their heads and looking for danger. And so sometimes you feel like an animal's looking right at you and he's looking through you. Like I shot a buck at 12 yards one time that picked up his head and looked right at me in my direction as I had my bow right in front of me. I thought for sure he was going to see me, but he looked right through me. I didn't move. And so like over the years, movement is key. And so there's a time to do that where you're slipping down on your butt, or there's a time when you're really getting close and you're that last 10, 20 yards, where you're going to poke up at 40 yards of those elk. Like that's when you need to go your slowest and your quietest. Don't let them know you're coming. Don't rustle the grass. Don't make any sound. But when you're 200 yards out and there's a ridge in between you, you can't move slow. You got to move ground and keep with those things. And I've seen these scenarios. Like I've got a buddy I was hunting with this year, and we had this giant bull that we were trying to cut off, and he was working like this edge, and that we were right on the like on the border of the private land of where we could hunt. And we had been dogging these things on public all morning long, and we got to this hilltop, and these elk were kind of scattered down there, and they were kind of feeding around. And so this would be a time to move faster. My buddy chose to crawl, and so he was kind of sliding down, and I waited right there and let him crawl up and make his play. But he crawled up, and all these elk just fed by this knob and fed to that fence line. And then, we're already crossed when, we were well 100 yards inside that public ground, to where if he just would have stayed low and then moved quietly like that, he probably would have shot that bull right down there. Now, I don't know that, that can be the wrong move as well, but that's like an instance where he should have moved faster and moved slower. And it like, he didn't have to crawl. Like I move as high up in the terrain as when elk can see me. And so if I can see elk, I know they can see me. And so what I mean by that is like sometimes you have to duck crawl, like we used to do in wrestling, where you're shooting a double leg takedown, where you duck crawl, and now my eyes are below the skyline and the elk can't see me. And then sometimes you're so close to the skyline that you've got to be crawling, or maybe even dragging your belly across the ground. But in this instance, we had this ledge and we had all this cover, and you're going to expose yourself over that rise, whether you're crawling or whether you're walking. And so like when he left me, God, he had plenty of time to close in and shoot that bull if he just would have gone slow and quiet with his feet and really watched his footfalls. But instead, he like crawled in, and I think he hit cactus halfway, and he's picking that out of his hand. And it's like one of those moments where it's like, now's the time to go. Close the deal, cut him off. They're in the perfect spot right there. And, it didn't work out on that bull or whatever that time. And who knows if it would have being more aggressive. But that was like an instance this season where, should have moved faster and we moved slower. So it's like all about the speed and kind of like knowing what you can get away with and what you can't.
Yeah. So one of the things I kind of want to, you talked about it a little bit, but so when you find those bulls that are, or the herd, and you put them down in the timber, are you trying to set yourself up a little bit better? So you try and look at it like your windy app or something and figure out where the wind's going or gonna be going, and then put yourself in a little bit better position to make a move on them when they do come out of the timber back into that feeding ground, or are you just kind of making your move as they come out?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I definitely want to put myself in striking position of them, but like for me, I want to try to keep my eyes on them or where they're going to come out. And I will set up for an ambush like that if I have the wind right, where I'll scoot in and then I'm trying to play where I think they're going to come out, but I'll tend to do that like later in the afternoon or in the evening. Like I don't want to sit in there all day and just have my wind in there all day, even if it is pretty good. And so, like, I'm definitely going to go try to get in striking distance of that meadow or get closer where I can see that meadow, maybe get on the far edge of it where I'm keeping my wind out of there, but I'm across from it and I can see the elk come out and make a play. So, like, I think you're right. I think it's like trying to get closer and get into striking range or trying to keep an eye on them or where they're going to come out. And then if I am going to set up for an ambush, I'll get in there like right in the afternoon, later when I think they're going to come out of that timber and I'm sitting in there with a good wind waiting for them to come out. So, I'd say it depends on the scenario, but yeah, I think it's good to get yourself in striking distance, get yourself closer to them. And sometimes you get closer and like, I don't follow them in the timber very often, but sometimes it's more open than I think. And I get over there and then I see the elk. And if I can see their bedding positions and where they're at, then I may make a plan to like kind of work in and above them, with a good wind and try to get them that way. And so like, again, just trying to like coyote and stay like within striking distance without like getting too close and giving myself away.
Yeah, for sure. That's then, like I said, that was my biggest fear is, getting in too close on them right away or something and trying to, and just blowing them out. I guess that's something that comes with probably at bats, experience and, learning from your mistakes too.
Man, yeah, it does. And like you say, like, I've messed up every way from Sunday, and that's like how I learn these different situations or scenarios. And yeah, you just you definitely don't want to spook them, but in the end, you just got to get in and hunt them. So yeah, I like to get that inside striking distance, but man, I mean, I've also, gosh, I've watched like I hunt this one spot that I backpack into, and I saw a bunch of elk working it, but you got to hike like 13 miles around this spot to go get into it. So I hiked all the way around, and I look down in this drainage, and all the elk are filtering into this timber draw, and I'm kind of across from them, and I'm watching, oh, I don't even know, 100, 150 elk, like late season, bunch of good shooter 6 points, and I'm thinking, man, I got all day with these things. And the wind was just wrong off that ridge and dove down in there, and pretty soon I spooked every one of those elk out of there that I'd worked so hard to go get into. So like it happens. You just make mistakes or you get in too close and you end up busting one in the herd. But yeah, it is just about finding them and then trying to get in, trying to hunt them and kill them and spook some along the way. Try not to, and eventually just get it right, So yeah, it's tough. There's, I know exactly where you're at, and it's tough. You just don't want to blow them up and you don't want to blow this opportunity. But by not wanting to blow it, like you don't realize when the seize the moment at time is either,
Yeah, for sure. So with that being said, then, like, would you say to somebody that's a new hunter, like myself for elk hunting, to try and just get myself as many at bats as possible and try and put myself on as many opportunities, or try and find, bulls and wait for that moment to get on them? Or would it be more like, hey, there's, some satellites hanging around too, try and put it on them first? Or what would be like, the easiest scenario for a beginner to try and, get as many at bats as possible?
Yeah, I think find elk and go hunt elk. Like I just find them and then just go try to get into them and make something happen. And I very rarely, like, I don't sit on elk for days and don't make plays. I mean, usually if I find an elk that day, I'm trying to work in, and sometimes I back out and I don't let them know I'm there, and I get to hunt them the next day, and I keep playing the game. And the longer I can play the game, the better my chances of success. So yeah, like I just find elk and I just go put yourself into a position where you can get into them, and maybe they disappear in some timber. Chasing them in that timber isn't the right move, but waiting until they come out in the evening and then they come out in a meadow. and you can kind of read their reactions and get close and use the cover of the timber, try to make something happen on those things, try to get in close. And then, sometimes you get held up at 100 yards or 120 yards. Sometimes they just feed into you, and so like I just play that wind, and yeah, I get those at bats you're talking about, and like that's my buddies that are really good hunters that but some are new to elk hunting. Like, man, they just get at bats. Like we traverse that mountains, and when we find an elk they want to shoot, it's like, well, there's a bull. Like, gosh, go get into him, see if you can make something happen. And sometimes you don't want to stalk to failure. You don't want to go over there and blow up that elk. So what you do is you go over there and you just try to play the game. Just try to get as close as he'll allow you. Try to keep your wind right. Just try to keep everything right and get as close as you can and give what take what he'll give you. And then when the giving's over, or you don't see an opportunity and you're stuck at 100 yards, you stop and you watch that bull and you let him feed into the next opening or over the next ravine. And then you go over that next ravine and then you try to find him over there. So yeah, man, I'd find elk and I'd just start getting plays at him, like just trying to get into him. And I noticed that around our public lands, that the calling too seems to be a crutch for guys, is they just work around calling at these elk and kind of hear some responses here or there, but they don't really know what the elk are doing in country, and they're not really targeting exactly where the elk are. But when you're glassing and where the herds are and where they're at and where you're stalking them, it seems like you have like such an edge on the competition. I'm just able to get more plays on elk and get closer and not let them know I'm there. So man, that would be my advice, is just go hunt those mountains. And when you see a bull, just go take what he'll give you.
For sure. So with that being said, would you want to just do as many over the counter type hunts? I mean, I always kind of struggle with that because obviously like Arizona, they've got massive bulls and some amazing hunts that you can do, but you need a ton of points. Or New Mexico, you just get super lucky. But at the same time, if I'm putting all my eggs in that basket, it's one of those things. Should I be buying, like an over the counter in Montana or doing like a Colorado every year just to try and, obviously just get on them and work them?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. Like, I think there's a lot of great hunting to be had out there in low point units, over the counter units. And for me, I look for bigger elk populations. I want there to be a lot of elk around, and usually when there's a lot of elk around, I can find big ones. And it's amazing. Like, the bulls that I kill are coming from over the counter tags. There's good opportunity there, and it's about building your elk hunting skill to a level to where when you do get one of those really good tags, then you can target some of those bigger herd bull, those ones we all dream about down and through there. But unless you have the hunting skill, even in those good units, those bulls are just not easy to kill, and so I would definitely make yourself a hunt plan, and I would include both. I'd try to hunt elk as much as you can. And whether that's, once a year, once every other year, I'd kind of have a multiple year strategy or multiple year plan where you can apply for places, maybe get lucky in New Mexico, or, be building points in Arizona. And then, yeah, I mean, the over the counter opportunities, once you build a couple points, go to Wyoming, good over the counter. Idaho has big populations. Montana has great populations. Colorado. So, yeah, there's good over-the-counter hunting to be had out there. And that's not to say you buy an over-the-counter and you're insured in killing a smaller bull. Like, a lot of these over-the-counter units are units that when you build your hunting skill, you can kill 330, 350, 370 bulls on these units that are over-the-counter units. And so, I think it's about elk hunting skill, building that experience, and elk hunting as much as you can to gain that experience. And you are traveling a long ways to elk hunt, and so you want to ensure it's going to be a good experience. And I mean, I guess that's the deal, is you don't want to get an over-the-counter tag and then show up and you don't find an elk for 9 days, and you don't really get your price of admission. You put all this money, time, and effort into it, and there wasn't very many elk in there or too many hunters, and so you didn't get a quality experience. But I would look for the higher populations of over-the-counter units. I try to hunt elk as much as you can and just make it count. When you come out west, you know it's a good unit, and you know that you're going to be able to turn up elk and have a positive experience, and maybe you don't always kill one, but you know you're going to get into them and be able to shuffle the deck and have a chance to go make plays on elk and maybe make something happen. So yeah, I think that'd be the best approach for you, is just to try to mix and match those.
For sure. It's funny you mentioned that, because that was my first experiences. I didn't really have a plan, bought the tag, went there, had the hunt, didn't even see any bulls. It was like day 5 or 6, maybe even 7, before I even saw any elk. And then next thing I know, it's time to turn and burn and go back home. So I totally get that. And like, for instance, Mark Livesey and the Treeline Academy thing he's doing is like, that has definitely helped me and to be able to establish a plan and try and attack that plan and be able to work that and find them. I think that's probably going to pan out pretty good as far as that, because like you said, I mean, spending that money and going out there and doing that, it sucks when you feel like you didn't get your experience. And really, I mean, it's your own fault because you didn't put in the time or the effort to try and figure it out a little bit. So it's pretty exciting to see hopefully what comes out of it.
Yeah, there's really good hunting to be had out west, but it does take research. And, this public land game, I mean, it's a bit of a gamble too. It's like, you're right. If you put in the time, you put in the effort, and you learn these units and pick the right units, you have a great experience. But, there's also a bit of risk and a bit of gamble to it too, where, we don't know all these units intimately, and to learn new places means we have to venture out and have to explore. And I have pretty good odds and pretty good luck with my process that I use for finding units and scouting units and trying to find good populations and things. But even I strike out here and there, but that's the difference. I mean, if you pay for an outfitted or a guided hunt, you're counting on the knowledge of that outfitter, that guide, to put you into animals or to have good property that he hunts. And being a public land hunter, we don't get that guarantee. And so what we have to do is be explorers. And part of the game is exploring new country, and every once in a while we strike out. And I've struck out all the way across the country, 20-hour drive, and not been able to find critters because maybe the migration didn't happen, or maybe it wasn't that good of a unit in the first place. Like, who knows, So like, even I strike out, and that is part of the gamble. And the fun of this whole deal is the entire process, is the adventure. But I'm with you, man. Like, nothing burns me more than going on a hunt and putting so much effort forth, and you don't even find the buck, or you don't even find the bull, or like the opportunity wasn't there. And I mean, it does happen, but if you put in the time and put in the research, there is great hunting to be had all throughout the West. Easy to draw tags, over the counter tags, and there's quality animals in these ones. And it's really about like building hunting skill and being able to hunt these places effectively, and it's amazing what you can turn up and the adventures you can go have on these lower blue collar hunts that we just have to learn ourselves. But there is some gamble involved, and I do strike out as well.
Brian, that's like perfectly worded, and I think a perfect way to end it too, because I don't think it could be topped what you just said. So I think it's awesome. Like you said, just the opportunities that are out there, and if you put in the work. But yeah, you worded it perfectly, and I think we're going to end it on that note. So I appreciate it, and thank you so much for coming on, sharing your knowledge. And I feel like I've learned a lot from this episode. So I thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, man. Yeah, good to jump on with you for sure.
All right. Take care, Brian.
You too.
And once again, thank you so much for listening to the Publicly Challenged podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please subscribe on whatever platform it is you're listening to. Also, if you could leave a review, that would help us out. And you can check us out on Instagram or at publiclychallenged.com. And once again, thank you so much for listening to the show.